Alright, yo mama! It's time to dust off your starter jackets, rip off those tearaways, blow into your game cartridges. I'm Sean Kelly.
I'm Pat Sellers.
And I'm Simon Blandford.
And we wish it was the 90s. Welcome back to our very famous podcast episode series this week on, where we dive into 90s classic Seinfeld with the double episode of The Pitch and The Ticket, which I believe originally aired, I want to say September 16, 1992, season 4, episodes 3 and 4. But before we get into the thick of it, I'm just going to share a few of our Seinfeld memories. I'm going to go to you first, Simon.
Thank you, Sean. Great to be here. My Seinfeld memories begin very vaguely in the 90s. I'm not really watching it. You know, when Seinfeld finished, I was 11. So I wouldn't say as much as I would like to think I was a very advanced 11-year-old. I don't think that Seinfeld was aimed at 11-year-olds, and you probably wouldn't have appreciated it that much as an 11-year-old. So my first real binging of Seinfeld took place in 2008, flatting on Ghuznee Street with Jesse Slankard and Gazelle Moinfar. We lived in an old, now condemned building, and we're all at university, myself at Teachers College, Gazelle at Architecture School on Vivian Street, and Jesse at Law School. And we every night would come home for dinner and eat dinner in front of the one laptop the three of us own, Jesse's, and we put the Seinfeld DVD in, and we'd watch 2 episodes every night. And it was my first experience of truly watching Seinfeld, and all 3 of us fell in love with it. Just an absolutely amazing show, and I always have fond memories of that time because of Seinfeld. It brings me back to that time of my life.
Phenomenal. What about you, Sellers?
First off, that feels like a real luxury these days, having a laptop with a CD or DVD drive in it. I was running we had some pretty old software for work, and I had to get one that was external. It wasn't easy to find something that you could plug into a USB that was a CD drive. So anyway, I'm probably similar line is Simon there with it probably wasn't pitched to us in the 90s. So my memories are more around being in the lounge watching my dad watch Seinfeld, where he would just be absolutely losing it. Pretty much any time Kramer came on the screen, and I just remember him constantly going, "He's mad, that bastard."
I can literally picture Tony doing this.
Almost falling off the couch, laughter. And I reckon I would have been laughing along because he was so into it. And I probably wasn't really getting it. But I've fond memories of, watching this kind of without watching it. I would have been laughing at all the, stupid stuff that Kramer did, but I don't think I would have enjoyed the things I like now. And I've had a couple of rewatches of Seinfeld in the last decade or so. But yeah, my memories of watching my dad watch Seinfeld.
That's a good way to be introduced to something. I'm similar. Like, I remember it always being on. I don't necessarily remember reveling or paying super attention to it. And I could be wrong, but I think there was a period of time where it was on quite late on TV2. And I think that would have been more when we were high school age. And I used to watch a lot of, I was a bit of a late boy, late for school, late to bed. And so I just watched whatever was on TV when I was in bed. Because I had what was a small screen, but a relatively large TV for the time. Sitting up in my room, and so I watched a bit. And then more recently, the YouTube algorithms have really lent into this, and I can't remember, up until watching these 2 episodes, I can't remember the last time I watched an episode in its entirety, but I feel like I've watched so much Seinfeld in the last couple of years just via YouTube, just the great scenes, the great moments. So yeah, that's sort of, I don't know if I've ever done a full watch through. It's one of those things where I feel like I've seen every episode, but I couldn't confirm it. I've never sort of sat down and watched from beginning to end, which is something I probably should do, but God knows if I'll ever have the time.
That really
as
rings
you
a
all
bell.
know.
That like high school age, and it was on really late. Like that
Yep.
really rings a bell. I was the same. I always have my TV on, pretty much until I fall asleep at 1, and then be late to school. I'm sure you're right. I reckon it was on TV2 real late at nights around that era.
Definitely was. Cam Paulock's brother. I'm pretty sure Ryan had every single episode taped from TV2. It was a real prized collection.
Let's go.
Yeah, I also, just to add to my memories, later on in life, my wife and we used to go around to my auntie and uncle's house, and every Monday night, and we watched 2 Seinfeld episodes. So I've watched it through 2 or 3 times now. The 9 seasons.
That's impressive. Before we get into one of Simon's sensational synopses, I forgot to do the plug. I better do it now before people log off or stop watching or stop listening.
Yeah.
So, podcast Wish It Was the 90s, WIWT90S, Instagram, Twitter. We've got a Facebook group that doesn't do anything, and we're available on pretty much the marquee podcast avenues. You know, your Spotify's, your Apple Podcasts, your iHeartRadios, a few others floating about. Yeah, and actually lately we've seen a little bit of traction in the Slack, so feel free to throw some comments, some suggestions, some sledges, whatever. And feel free also, if you want to review us, 5-star us. Turns out you can say whatever you want. It's only the 5 stars that matter, so feel free.
Hit the space bar a couple of times. That'll do.
That will do. Simon, sensational synopses.
Well, very hard to follow that fantastic pitch, but I'm going to give it a go with my own. A very original pitch straight from Wikipedia, so let's read it. So the NBC executives, 2 of them, approached Jerry after his comedy act and asked him to come up with an idea for a TV series. George decides that he can be a sitcom writer, of course, because he's George, and comes up with the idea of it being a show about nothing. Kramer and his wacky friend, Newman, in amongst it as usual, and Kramer decides to trade Newman a radar detector for a helmet. And later, Newman receives a speeding ticket due to the detector being defective. While waiting to meet the NBC executives, George and Jerry meet Crazy Joe Davola, a writer and total nut who goes to the same therapist as Elaine, Dr. Reston. Jerry, desperately searching for conversation, says he will see him at a party that Kramer's having. When it becomes apparent that Joe knows nothing about it and was not invited, Jerry makes a hasty and unsuccessful attempt to backtrack. George becomes more and more nervous about the impending meeting. Jerry tries to calm him down by building him up. In the meeting, George argues with the executives about his proposed premise, a show about nothing, no plot, no stories. It does not go over well with the executives, and when they show displeasure, George refuses to compromise on the idea. Jerry later blasts George for his actions, quite rightly too. George starts a relationship with one of the executives, Susan Ross, who of course we are to see much more of in season 6. When George brings her to Jerry's apartment, Kramer drinks spoiled milk and vomits on her. Crazy Joe Davola, upset at not being invited to Kramer's party, attacks Kramer, kicking him in the head. Thankfully, Kramer was wearing Newman's helmet at the time, which saves him any visible injury. However, he does seem to be affected in certain ways, as Sean referred to earlier with his yo-yo ma beginning. When Kramer tells Jerry that he was attacked, he warns that Joe is looking for Jerry as well. Dr. Reston went to Europe with Elaine, and no one is making sure Joe takes his medication. It ends with some high comedy scenes in court, with Newman trying to get off his speeding ticket. when Kramer, with a, shall we say, struggling memory, not helping Newman very much. And that is the synopsis.
I'll just wanted to chime in on the synopsis. Very interesting parallels with some of the Simpsons episodes we've covered, with an obvious main storyline and then a clearly for laughs side story.
Kramer often used for that.
Yes. Yeah. So is Homer and Bart, you know?
Yeah. Good stuff.
When it's not about them. But yeah, it's obviously that's a TV show sort of trope of sorts. Right. So we're just going to talk about a few interesting things, I guess, about these particular episodes. The what are they? The pitch and the ticket. I'll go to you first, Pat.
I got a question for you, Sean. Actually, the bar at the start. Some parallels to Bad Guy Bar. Looked like a similar setup.
Very similar setup, and one might say that TV execs are bad guys.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. I was I quite liked rewatching this, and George's spiel about toilet paper at the start just made me think that he would be the first to be panic buying toilet paper in a pandemic. Pretty topical. There was just some great stuff in there. I also liked Kramer's pitch for the show when they keep coming up with ideas. And his one actually kind of sounded like American Horror Stories Freak Show season. If you like that. But yeah, there's some great stuff with Joe Davola. I thought that he seemed like a character that could have been on what's his name? Lebowski, and one of those what was that team of guys called, Simon? You know, there was like the three guys. No, the three guys with blonde hair that were crazy as hell that were always after them. The Nihilists. The Nihilists. Yeah, he seemed heaps like one of them.
He would have made a great nihilist with Joe Davola.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing that was really interesting about this episode was just the parallels between real life and this episode. So obviously George and Jerry pitching the idea about a show about nothing. There's some direct parallels with Larry and Jerry pitching a show about nothing. And of course, Seinfeld is famously about nothing. And it was just a bit of a real FU to all the executives who said it was a terrible idea in the first place. Because at this point, Seinfeld was extremely popular. It was sort of becoming the phenomenon that it was going to be throughout the 90s. And I think that maybe Jerry and Larry, particularly Larry, was still a bit bitter that everyone doubted the idea in the first place. So to rub it in, doing this episode and show the executives being skeptical about it, I think, it was classic. Vengeful Larry David.
Would have been a pretty good one for them to film, having Larry David there and knowing that, George is basically Larry David. There was one part after their meeting where Jerry's giving him a massive dressing down, calling him a psycho and saying, he needs help and it would take a team of psychiatrists. And he looks like he's really enjoying getting into them. I just kept thinking about how Larry David would have been seeing him yelling at George, but basically talking to him.
Yeah.
That would be
I mean, there's quite a lot of, I don't know if it's like intentionally meta, but it's like this commentary, obviously, on this thing that's happened. And there's the obvious stuff like those parallels, and I'm sure we'll talk about the Kramer one as well. But I sort of, as I was watching it, they do mug off execs a lot. They quite regularly, George is like straight away, anyone could write a sitcom. Have you seen what's on TV?
Yeah.
Kind of maybe like self-referential, mugging themselves off, but perhaps also just mugging off the industry in general.
Oh, the industry for sure. And the reason I say that vengeful thing, and you use the word meta, Sean, and I think, correct me if I remember, I think George says that, when we're in the Chinese restaurant the other day, or was it the parking garage? I'm not sure exactly what he says. That's an episode. That's a show. And those two specifically, the Chinese restaurant and the parking garage, where they literally, all they do is sit in a Chinese restaurant waiting for a table and just walk around a parking garage looking for a park. The executives just rubbished those episodes, the ideas for episodes. It'll never work, all that sort of stuff. So to include that sort of throwaway line about, hey, that's a show about one of those concept episodes was definitely Larry just getting his dig in.
How good. I'll double down on Joe Davola from Pat. What a great character. And you only see him once, and the rest of the episode he's just talked about, but he's got such a presence.
Crazy Joe Davola.
Yeah. A couple other things that I thought were pretty funny. It almost felt like Elaine's scenes in Europe were deliberately, obviously green screened, or maybe even been blue screen at the time.
I thought it was I thought the Eiffel Tower was like cardboard. It was. I agree. It was hilarious. I think it was intentional too. I agree.
And the other thing I noticed for the first time, maybe I was paying more attention than ever, but Jerry's apartment's pretty, and it's pretty run down in there. You get so comfortable seeing something all the time, you never notice it. And most of the time on sitcoms, the apartments are phenomenal. Like on Friends, both the apartments are mint. But there's a bit of New York realness to that one.
Yeah.
I noticed for the first time, it was actually the very start of the second part of this 1 hour episode, when Jerry's sporting a pair of Nikes, that he has tiny, tiny feet. Like Joey Tribbiani in Vegas when they realize he's got tiny feet and he has to buy tennis shoes. There was one.
There's probably a couple other things we have to talk about. I'll save the most interesting part for last. But this is the first appearance of Susan, long-time recurring love interest of George.
Absolutely.
I guess we better talk about the elephant in the room, Kramer. Simon, you want to fill us in on the Kramer?
Yeah, so what I believe is that, again, the parallels between Larry and Jerry pitching the show are explicitly referred to in this episode. So Kenny Kramer, Larry's real-life neighbour, when Larry told him about the show, demanded that he play Kramer. Much like Kramer demands that he play Kramer in this episode. And Larry was so worried that Kenny Kramer would kick up a fuss that in the first few episodes, Kramer's actually called Kessler. So he wanted to change the name to Kessler so Kenny Kramer wouldn't kick up so much of a fuss. But the character was just such a Kramer, I don't know if that makes sense, but the Kramer was just the perfect name. So they switched from Kessler to Kramer, I think, some way through season 1. Just more of that.
Oh, right.
More of those meta parallels there.
I've got a question for you, Simon, that you may or may not be able to answer. So obviously in this episode, George is Larry, and George and Jerry have had 3 seasons worth of friendship to this point. Were Jerry and Larry good friends before the show started?
It's a good question. I think they were. I think they just knew each other very well from the stand-up scene. And Larry wasn't... Larry definitely did stand-up, and I think that's where they knew each other from. Larry had a bit more experience with writing for shows, I believe.
And George.
George. Yeah.
No, than George. Because obviously George is...
than George. Yeah, definitely more than George.
All right.
George had his off-Broadway show.
Oh, what a line. George had to be the MVP of this episode for mine.
We'll get to that at the end. I've got the MVP and the runner-up to come, but yeah, it would be. I agree. It would be very. You would have to have a real interest in another character for a specific reason to go past George. So I suppose before we get to that part, we'll just run off a few quotes. If anyone noted anything down, I've got a couple.
You kick us off, Bob.
All right. I probably my favourite is when the phone rings and Jerry answers the phone and the person goes, "Hi, would you be interested in switching over to TMI long distance service?" "Oh, gee, I can't talk right now. Why don't you give me your home number and I'll call you later?" I'm sorry, we're not allowed to do that." "Oh, I guess you don't want people calling you at home." "No." "Well, now you know how I feel."
That's gold. I actually noted that down, that I am going to use that at some point. If you ever had to buy Google ads, you instantly get hounded for the next 6 months by marketing companies to ask you how your ads are going and if you need help. And the next time that's happening, I'm going to use that.
So I also noted that one down, Sean. A, because it's great. But B, because as a high school teacher, I often think about how a show from the 90s would translate today. And that being hounded by telemarketers, that joke would fall so flat on, anyone under the age of 25, because home phones basically don't exist. And I just thought that was a really fascinating line. It was one of the absolute coup de grace of the episode, right? It was one of the peaks of the episode. And now anyone under 25, they just don't know the struggle of having telemarketers constantly call you.
I suppose you still get like random spam phone calls every now and then on your cell phone, but it's not quite the same, is it?
No, you just hurriedly
I'm
press the
definitely
red
on
button.
some sort of list. I get them. Don't know how, but I'm on everyone's list for those.
Anyone else got any quotes?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that just a couple of quotes that I thought illustrated how meticulous the scripts are written. Compared with, say, Curb Your Enthusiasm, that's not really scripted at all. But I think it really adds to the show. So when George and Jerry are discussing the premise of the show, and George is saying, Jerry's saying, nothing. I think you might have something there. That whole, the contrasting nothing and something was very, very clever. And the aforementioned Jerry absolutely blasting George for George saying he doesn't want to compromise his artistic integrity.
I've definitely got artistic integrity written down.
And Jerry says, "You're not artistic and you have no integrity." Which I just absolutely reveled in.
Where did you come up with that?
So I've got a few more, but I'll come back to myself later because I'm known for stealing quotes. So go for it, Pat.
Everyone's doing something. We'll do nothing. It's the start of that one. That was bloody good. We're running over both episodes for this.
Yeah.
There's basically some monologues coming out of Newman in the courtroom.
Oh, so good.
When they're trying to say that Kramer wanted to kill himself because he never got to live out his dream of being a banker. He's saying that his friend only wanted to be loved, well, to love, to be loved, and to be a banker.
I've got that written down as well. Yes, I admit I was speeding, but it was to save a man's life.
You must be a banker.
Shout out to Newman's costume as well in that scene.
Yeah,
that was well done for the courtroom.
I confessed to I tried to find a good high definition of that image to put on for the episode when we release it, but alas, it evaded my Photoshop skills. I've just got one more. when when George is panicking, and Jerry says, "Don't worry about it. They're just TV executives. They're men with jobs, Jerry. They wear suits and ties. They're married. They have secretaries."
That's good.
Oh, George just killed it for a good portion of this. Like, at one point in the interview, he just gets water, and he's unbelievably impressed by the fact that they have a water bottle. That was great. And he just, for some reason, keeps comparing himself to Ted Danson, who was like the absolute biggest star on network TV at that time for Cheers, which kind of just sums up George's delusions of grandeur.
I know that the listeners won't be able to see me, but the way he like points his hands at the execs and goes, "Nothing."
Well, Bob, I have written down the vigor with which George says nothing. So I could not, the vigor with which he says it, the certainty is absolutely wonderful. So I concur.
And the response is, then why am I watching it? Because it's on TV. Not yet, it's not. Yeah, George kills it from go to woe. Even the very start when he claims that he's unbelievable at spelling people's last names.
Yeah.
It just comes out of nowhere. And it has nothing to do with anything. They just threw it in. Just randomly start spelling the guy's last name. I'm unbelievable at spelling last names.
Except Russell Dalrymple's last name.
Interesting that obviously, while he's killing it in this episode for the viewers, he's obviously killing it as well for Susan, because she's very interested in George.
For some reason that is never adequately explained through the course of the entire run of Seinfeld.
No. I mean, watching Seinfeld, generally speaking, and George dating anyone is quite baffling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's always punching well above his weight.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very strange. I've got one more little observation to make about Uncle Leo, if I may.
Yes.
So Uncle Leo is so great, and he's one of my favorite characters, but George and Jerry and Elaine, you can sort of, it transfers well to discussion because it's scripted so well. People like Uncle Leo and Kramer, they're so great, but it's actually not that funny to talk about unless you're watching, because it's that sort of physical comedy.
Yeah.
It's fair.
And Uncle Leo, I mean, there are other episodes where Uncle Leo does have just absolutely amazing lines. I just wanted to mention Uncle Leo's cameo appearance, that he's furious at Jerry for not stopping. But it's hard to say on a podcast and describe how funny it is, because he's physically, Len Lesser is the actor. He's such a gifted physical comedy actor, much like Kramer, actually. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Uncle Leo, but I can't do him justice on a podcast.
You
don't get a lot of that. You don't get a lot of that, like, physical comedy these days. Like Kramer's prime example of it. Chris Farley was brilliant back in his day. Dying art form.
Yeah, I dare say.
Go on, Bob.
I can't remember a mind blank on his name here, which is odd. Who plays the mask?
Jim
Carrey. Probably ruined physical acting. Despite being a big fan of his myself, people got sick of it. For
sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think Kramer's just the right amount, right? Because he's only 1/4 of the main cast, so it's not constant.
For me, it's like the Will Ferrell effect, like one of the funniest people ever.
Yeah,
but I'd say maybe people argue with me on this, but a lot of the films where he is the protagonist, he's not as funny as when he's Frank the Tank or, in Wedding Crashers or whatever.
The best cameo of all time.
So we've got a new segment that Simon's introducing for the podcast today. Things you wouldn't get away with on network TV anymore.
Yeah. So this is just purely me, I'm guessing. So at one point, somebody says that someone's getting gypped. Can't say that anymore. Kramer says, "That's queer, huh?" Another point. A lot of in the Kramer Newman storyline, which I'll talk about that in a second. But a lot of flippant suicide jokes going on in the
I noticed that. It made me uncomfortable, actually.
in the Kramer Newman storyline. At one point during the court scene, Newman acts out Kramer hanging himself.
Yeah.
Which I just don't think really would go down well in the comedy world today. So yeah, just four things in quite a short space of time that you couldn't really get away with now. Not to say that anyone's terrible people for writing it, but it's just interesting to note the change of times in the last 30 years.
I think what's really interesting about it is, and you actually do see this with Friends a little bit, is that people are still okay with it because of the time, right? So if Seinfeld episodes are on, they're not getting edited or episodes aren't not airing or anything like that. The same with Friends, but you can find heaps of like there's lots of gay stuff in Friends that you just wouldn't have in a sitcom anymore.
Yeah.
But that show still runs on loop in every country in the world, right? Just like Seinfeld did for quite a long time. I'm sure Cheers probably has some of the same stuff as well.
Yeah.
But it seems to be okay to rerun it because people can acknowledge it's of a time.
Yeah, it's a product at its time. You got to take it as it is, and there's plenty of things that you couldn't have now. Probably couldn't have Michael Richards starring in anything. The rest of his career. I thought that might have been top of your list. We'll move on.
Yeah, I thought that on the Michael Richards subject, not that subject, but him being Kramer. I actually thought the incident. I actually thought the Kramer Newman story until the courtroom was quite weak, kind of silly a little bit, and they hadn't quite harnessed the power of Kramer at this point. They sort of get, in that courtroom scene was just brilliant. Got no quibbles with that whatsoever. It was fantastic. But I think Sam made the point in the last Simpsons episode that I wasn't on about how the Simpsons writers it got to a point with Milhouse where they just knew how to harness Milhouse and they knew exactly what they were doing and how to make Milhouse really, really funny. And with Kramer, they'd gotten most of the way there, but not until sort of season 6 do I think they really start to harness that. And that's such a common thing with comedies, right? Like Cartman, in South Park, the first few seasons, he's just like swearing all the time and he's kind of obnoxious. And when you look back and it's just real unfunny. Not Stan. God, I've forgotten Stan Marsh's dad. Randy, of course. So, and two more characters they don't quite harness until the latest season.
Randy's a great example of a blossoming character.
Yeah, even Homer in The Simpsons, I think he's another one they don't harness till, season 4, 5, 6. So I thought Kramer, he's amazing. The courtroom was great, but some of those early storylines are just a bit silly.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Like, I think Seinfeld's a good example where they work it out and they never go too far with it. They work out what works and they stick to it.
Yeah.
Whereas The Simpsons, once you get into those mid to late teens seasons, it's overkill. It's too much. It's like. They lose what works. Maybe not with Milhouse, but certainly with some of the Homer stuff. It's like this doesn't make sense at all, or whatever was irreverently funny about it is no longer what's happening.
Yeah, and that's why Jerry, turned down $100 million. Keep going, he knew that it run its course, and I think that's the beauty of it. It never got old.
All right. Well, we'll go with runners-up and MVPs. Anyone want to go first?
Well, I think everyone's running for George as the MVP of this episode.
Should we just get it out there? So,
I'm going to go left field. I'm going to take Crazy Joe Davola as the MVP.
As your MVP?
One scene, yeah. One scene, but a presence throughout those 1/2 episodes.
When he might be outside the coffee house.
Mm.
Good stuff.
Yeah, it is good stuff. Yeah, I think George MVP and Jerry runner-up for his consistently blasting George for his lack of artistic integrity. No doubt about it. Jerry, best supporting actor. George, MVP.
I'm definitely going to have to go George MVP. George is the perfected model of awkward comedy. Like, you kind of cringe every time. But you're never to a point that you don't want him to be on screen.
Yeah.
Sometimes watching The Office, I find David Brent too much. I can't handle it. I need that
That's
to
bring
end.
that up. I agree.
But with George, it's literally just to the point of which you can handle it and you actually want more. You want to know what stupid thing George is about to say to the executives. And when he keeps saying nothing and Jerry's trying to come in and say, yeah, and he's like, no, nothing, Jerry. You're just like, yeah, I want this. I need this. So he's definitely my MVP as well. And I would have to say my runner-up's Kramer. I really, really enjoyed his concussion symptoms. Every time he started speaking, was it Spanish? I don't know.
Yeah, that was pretty good of Michael Richards. That was very impressive, whatever he did there.
Showing up with the one pant leg on. That was good.
I think that wraps everything up, unless anyone else has got something to add.
No, not at all. Thoroughly enjoyed the episode. Looking forward to doing a few more.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to a few more Seinfelds. All right. Not sure when the next Seinfeld will be, but I know that in the coming weeks, I think next week we're back to an X-Men episode, and then we're rounding out this month with Mortal Kombat, the movie, 1995. Very, very excited in the slacks for that one. Until next time, dear listeners.